Here we go. Here we go. Here we go.
Oh, we got the rejoin music.
Hold on. Wait. Don't. Not yet.
No, don't listen to him. Just
So she was talking about how black it was. And anyway.
bigger, blacker, better.
Talking about the bigger, blacker box.
It was my stout. She said it needed to be bigger ABV, a little darker in color, a little bigger in
It's
stature.
tough when it's always just needs to be bigger and it's just
That'll refresh you.
underperforming.
Yeah.
We understand.
Yeah.
All
So
right,
anyways-
so welcome back from the break. So we're going to do a couple different things here. First of all, we're going to drink this wonderful 40th anniversary hoppy beer that Justin is passing around here. Chris and I have a quick little experiment that we did that we're going to pass around, and then we're going to get into our main topic, which is stouts.
And I think just super quick, like, this is the Sierra Nevada 40th anniversary. So I think we could really say the craft beer revolution's about 40 years old.
More pouring,
mean-
less talking.
Well, Sierra Nevada, I think,
Thank
certainly deserves credit for being part of it. I would
part of the
say
OG,
that
like-
Anchor was a
well,
little bit before
okay,
that,
yes.
but I will agree with you that, in my opinion, they are one of the big three in terms of really reviving and lasting through
Yeah.
the craft crash from the 90s and all that. You've got Anchor, you've got Samuel Adams, and you've got Sierra Nevada.
Yep.
That, to me, are go-tos. Anytime you get any beers from any of those breweries, they're solid beers. They're great.
They're
I did
always
not
good.
know
They're
about
always-
Anchor until a couple of years ago, but I knew Sam Adams and St. Arnold was always the big one in my life growing up in Houston.
Yeah, well, in
Yeah.
Texas, St. Arnold, you can't tell the Texas beer
Yeah.
story without St. Arnold. So,
We'll
yeah.
see. And for me, kind of the same thing is growing up in Texas in the late 90s, it was Shiner.
Yeah, and Shiner.
It was Shiner Bock.
I mean, I almost don't even consider Shiner Bock to be craft brewing because it was everyone drank it. It was like Lone Star
Yeah,
and
that's
Budweiser.
true. It seems too widely acceptable, but it is, in fact, craft.
Yeah.
Yeah, and they put out some very solid beers.
Yeah, they do. And,
Yeah, I feel like they really walk that line between craft and widely accepted. You know, I think if you pull out a Shiner beer, no matter what it is, anybody you're around is willing to try it at least because they just trust Shiner that it's
Right.
not going to be something too in your face, over the top.
except for my
You know,
mother.
It's accessible
I
beer.
hand Shiner to my mother, and she goes, "Oh, not again." But that's supposedly in the 80s in Lubbock, Texas. Which, if you're from Texas, you know of Lubbock. If you're not, it's a college town. There's a college, and
In
there's
the middle
that
of
it.
nowhere. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Stubby knows a lot about Lubbock.
Yeah, we're not going
They
to go
call
into
it
those stories.
Stubbock.
But Shiner used to produce a basic cheap beer, and it was a white can. It was stenciled beer, and that's it.
Right.
And that
I
was their
remember that,
original Shiner Blonde.
I remember that.
So
Yeah,
at any
so-
rate, let's
Yeah.
get on to what Chris and I did here. This is just a
Ooh,
real
that's really
needs
nice.
real
there.
quick
2
aside,
cups.
completely separate from anything we're talking about tonight. It's just a fun thing we did that I thought would be worth trying here. So I've got in my growler here and in Chris's growler, we've got James Lalonde's Rausch beer recipe, which I just absolutely love. Whenever I go to James' house, he's always got this on tap, and it's just an excellent, easy drinking Rausch beer that I think is just a fantastic beer. So my goal this year, I know I wasn't here for everybody's new beers resolution in the last episode.
What? There was a new beers? Well,
Yes.
I think
Yes.
since we weren't there, I think, Brandon,
Okay,
you,
all
you
right,
and I
yeah,
should
you
give
and
our
I-
new
let's
beers
you and I weigh
resolution.
in on it. My new beers resolution was become a good lager brewer this year. So that's what I'm doing is I'm lager brewing, and this was my first lager of the year, was a Rausch beer, because I know I just love this
Nice.
recipe of James. So what was your new beers resolution?
Well, outside of winning Iron Mash, which has already come true.
All right. There you go. Something tells me that's a retroactive new beers resolution.
I'm surprised his head fits through the doorway anymore.
Hey, you know what? It is an incredibly difficult competition to even place in at all. So anybody who wins it should have license to walk around with a big head for a year, as far as I'm concerned.
And it's one of those.
I have a big head about second place.
I kind of joke about it. I mean, it was a crapshoot. Like I said, with 10 minutes left, we were sent back to rewrite a recipe. I'm not going to get into too much of that. It was a fun deal. But so my New Year's resolution, or my beer resolution was, in 2020, I'm going to win Master Brewer. And that's not just me talking shit. Like, I'm legitimately I'm
we
gonna
find ourselves opponents.
Yes, yes, sir, we do. So I'm gonna try to get my judging point. I'm gonna try and do some different things to win Master Brewer in 2020. We'll see.
Very nice.
Yeah, who's winning that so far?
For those of y'all that don't know, Master Brewer is a local homebrew competition that we have.
It's just club.
It's just our brewing club, yeah.
Just our homebrew club. You can only enter 6 beers per year that are BJCP judged, and they all have to be different styles.
So again, a tough competition to win because you're being judged against all kinds of different styles. You're not entering a certain category or anything like that. It's a tough one to win. Not only have I gotten second place in it before, I am currently in second place this year to go along with my second place master or Iron Mash. So I am firmly in the second place lane on most of the stuff. So that's kind of a secondary goal of mine too. I'm going to make a run at Master Brew this year too. So
we will see, sir.
we will see. Yes. So what we've got in front of us here is Chris and I split a batch of this Roush beer, which is I think 80% smoked malt, and then there's some caramel and some standard Pils malt in there.
I love a good smoky ass beer like this.
Yeah, you know, when done right, I just absolutely love them. And you either like smoke beers or you don't. So this is mine right here. Yeah.
But I feel you're right.
So
There is
I
that
did
fine
mine-
line between done well and
Right.
So,
We
I
encountered-
did mine as a classic lager, the classic Roush beer fermentation, and Chris did his with the Hornindal Kvike, which is what we used on our
Yes.
on
Same
our
as
Iron
our
Mash
Iron
beer
Mash
also,
beer.
which we found to be a fairly neutral yeast. In terms of ale yeast, I'll say. So this is a split batch between the two of them, and we tasted this side by side the other night, and we thought it was just really interesting, the differences between them.
same recipe.
Yeah, the ale
It's
doesn't.
not the same resin, it's the same batch.
Yeah, it's
We brewed a 10-gallon batch and split it.
Okay.
So
two
but
different
same
fermenters,
base.
Yeah.
same day, everything.
Different yeast, but same.
The
Yes.
ale, even though you said it was Horndal, even though that's supposedly clean, I get a lot of fruity esters from that one.
There is
that was kind of
definitely
surprising
noticeable
me.
fruity
Yeah.
esters in it. Yeah.
And I didn't push the temperature range on that. It was a case of my fermentation chamber was full, so I just put it next to the fermentation chamber on the warmer side next to the compressor and let it ride at room temperature.
Yeah, it's really interesting.
So what we when we had a few of us tasting these side by side the other night, the consensus we came to is that with the fruity esters rising a little bit, it kind of toned down the smoke and caramel flavor in it, where the malt flavor really came through a lot better in the lager version of it, which was just a much cleaner yeast profile and let the malt shine more. And I was really surprised at how different the two were, because I really did think of the Hornindal as being a pretty clean yeast. Hey, can we shut off the peanut gallery, Mike?
It's off.
It's off? Okay.
Yeah, I switched it to back in here, so
Okay.
that's why you hear me.
Oh, okay. So for all of y'all listening to all that noise in the
It's
background,
probably
we've
just
got Bluebonnet judging
powerful.
going on in the other room, and it's just it's a lot of people
No
judging
spoilers,
and
though.
so
No spoilers.
Sorry
You
for
have
the
to be a
background
premium
noise.
member for spoilers.
So at any rate, I thought it was really interesting study in how the esters change the malt character. Personally,
yeah, there is definitely. Man,
One
I
of our
would
mics is a lot hotter than the others.
say I wouldn't believe you
one
that
of
these
these
were two.
mics is not like the other.
Yeah,
Where's
it's
the other?
very hard to tell which one's which, or
Well,
Not which one,
so
which,
it's
but-
one of those. I poured both mine. I kept them separate. I honestly couldn't tell you which one is which. Which. Well, the lager's on the left, the ale's on the right. But I can definitely tell you that's the lager. It's a lot cleaner, but yet you get a lot of those different smoky flavors. That I get some of that ham. I can tell you like
A little bit of ham, huh?
The-
yeah.
this
one
is
is going
definitely
ham.
the
I like
lager.
it.
Like it has that ham. You guys talking about the esters and stuff. This one here, definitely, I get a little bit of that fruitiness. I get less of the hammy, like wonderful smoke flavors that's what I love about a
Which
good
I
smoked
thought it was
beer is-
really interesting how it toned down the smoke and the malt.
It
and
definitely
that-
did. Like
I'm kind of upset that mine didn't have more ham in it, which is kind of a weird thing to say.
Would you want me to put some ham in your beer?
I mean, I kind of want to take both our beers and just blend them together and see if we can get best of both worlds.
Here we go.
I don't know, Brand.
See, I get more ham on the ale.
Do you?
Yeah.
Wait.
Yeah.
Are
I
you
think the lager is a lot cleaner, but I also get more smoke in the nose, and
Definitely more smoke.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, the lager almost comes across a little like bacon. Like my first thought when I took
Little bit,
a drink
yeah.
was like, this is bacon.
What I've also found
Bacon.
in drinking this beer is that when you sit over 5 or 10, 15 minutes drinking it, and your palate sets into it, the flavor kind of changes a little bit too.
Yeah.
When I first drank it, I thought, "Woo, that's in your face." And then when you get accustomed to it a little bit, I feel like it tones down a little bit. It's a much more drinkable beer as you go. When at first you think, I don't even know if I could drink a pint of this, and then
Suddenly
I
you've
find
got
myself
5.
4 pints into it. Yeah.
So what's the ABV on this beer?
It's about 6%.
Okay.
So it's on the high end.
So now just a random kind of. Did y'all both finish about the same gravities?
I failed to take a final gravity.
You failed. How about you, Brandon?
I've been
Wow.
Brandon, did you disappoint us all and failed to
point,
No,
Brandon
no,
says,
mine was,
absolutely.
mine
I
was
took a
about
final
10,
gravity.
12.
about? So he's just guessing. So he
10,
didn't
12, 10,
disappoint
12,
us.
10, 11. You know how it is.
I've been bad about taking final gravity readings, but I've also been bad about transferring from secondary to kegs.
right.
So it's finished. It's definitely finished, but I don't know what it finished at.
Boo.
Just
It wasn't my recipe. It doesn't matter.
it probably would. They probably finished very close. It
It's
just
beer.
was a curiosity.
Yeah,
Between the lager and the ale.
that's
Yeah,
a
they
totally
probably
valid
are
question.
very close, I would guess.
I wish I had taken a reading so that I would know.
So you know when somebody comes in the shop, what the first questions we ask them is.
Right.
Yeah, well, what temperature did you use, and did you use fermentation control?
Yeah, but what's the
Well
third
played,
question?
sir.
What's after that? It's like,
The
well, did you
34th
take gravity?
questions would be, what is your
Did you take gravity
original
readings?
gravity
Yeah,
and what's your
yeah.
final
Yeah.
gravity? But
No, so I took the yeast cake from this, and Mikey and I brewed a Helles, and I put it on this yeast cake to try and recreate the
some of the
the Schlenkerla
Yes.
Helles that they don't
Oh.
put smoked malt in it.
that beer's
But so what I'll say about that is
God, that beer's
the Helles
fabulous.
came out great. I love it.
Yeah.
There's no smoke flavor in it.
And where's it? Where is that?
That's because you didn't use
That's
enough
at
smoked
home.
equipment.
I did not bring
no.
that tonight. We had too many things to talk about, which
Yeah.
brings us to
what we have to
moving
talk
on to
about.
stouts. So let's talk about stouts.
Stouts.
Let's talk about
So-
stouts,
Stout.
baby. Let's talk about
Do you want
dark
to pull out a
creamy
stout, or,
Let's talk about all
do you
the
wanna
good
pull it out
things
stout,
and
do
the
you wanna
dark
pull it out
grains.
stout?
stouts can
I would
be.
like to go last. I think I've got a
Okay.
contender.
I'm
Okay.
really surprised how much singing happened right there.
Yeah,
So-
I didn't know
We had
this
lots
was a
of good
musical.
lyrics.
A lot more
Oh, this
singing
is
than I
absolutely
expected.
a lot more
musical.
lyrics that we came up with than
And-
I thought.
Okay, so
you know you knew the lyrics, you just were afraid to sing along.
I was afraid that this episode would go the way of the quads,
It's getting there.
so I tried to get.
Sean Kidwell was in.
Yeah, I know.
We still have time.
I
for
tried
that.
to get commercial examples that were plain stouts and not imperial stouts, which is really hard to find commercial examples of.
Oh, well,
So-
I took
and-
care of the high ABV.
I
So
also
let's-
tried.
We already started with the high.
So
beer.
let's talk about that, though. I mean, it totally just you brought up that. Well, you know, this segment's making beer again.
Well,
And our goal, our initial goal,
yes.
our initial goal was to do the BJCP stout, which
Well, we were trying to
It's-
stick to like Irish stout, sweet stout, oatmeal stout, and American stout. I think were the four that we were trying to stick to.
Which is not what it got passed on to me.
Well, you know,
So
since
I was
then,
like,
since,
well, crap, I didn't do any of those. I
since
did
then
something
it's
else.
grown. You know, so we're gonna get a little more exotic with it than that tonight, and we're just gonna cover the stout range as a whole because the beauty of this of the stout umbrella is that it has everything from the very drinkable, low ABV and not real complex Irish stout all the way up to
yeah.
the Russian Imperial Stout, and then even into what Sandra is going to show us a blonde stout, which is kind of an abstract concept,
Yeah, I didn't
and
think
everything
that
in
existed.
between.
And then she also
have
has a
two.
golden pastry stout.
Golden pastry stout even.
Oh my!
Like we're
So-
really going. But
I have an oyster stout too. So
I've been wanting to try an oyster
I
stout
have.
for
I've never had
years.
an oyster stout.
Oh, they're so good.
I think one of the few things we don't have randomly for us is like a 12 or 13% imperial stout. Like, oh
I
wait,
have
that's
a
fine.
Never
10.5.
mind.
I
never
actually,
mind. Chris
I,
has spoken up.
I brought a special bottle with me
So-
that is an aged Russian imperial.
So that's kind of where
So,
I want to start
I was-
off with this. Is
Oh, you
that
wanna
the
start big?
No. I want to start off with that. The beauty of this style is the range of it.
Yeah.
And the range. I'm not just talking about ABV, but I'm also talking about complexity and recipe development and that kind of thing.
Everyone say goodbye,
We love you,
Shawn.
Shawn.
I love you, Shawn. And I love your stouts.
That did not translate well to radio, but
Does it ever?
So for those of y'all that couldn't see what it transpired, Shawn from Cowtown came in, waved goodbye, and blew us kisses. So
And we all blew
and
kisses
so we had
back.
to kiss him back, and that's just the right thing to do.
That's
Yeah.
right.
Sean's one of our very favorites. That's one of our very favorite breweries. If you want to know where to find the Come and Brew It crew, it's at
Cowtown
it's at
Brewing.
Cowtown.
Cowtown.
When in doubt, go check Cowtown. That's
I
where
promise
we go.
you,
Yeah.
after 6 o'clock on almost any night at Cowtown, you can find either a Texas brewing guy or a Come and Brew It guy, like at Cowtown. Almost,
their
almost
beer is so
every night,
ridiculously
like-
good, and their food is fantastic, and we just love that place. So,
Yeah.
at any rate,
So
getting
back to
stouts.
stouts.
Let's go there right now.
The American, but per
All right.
per
Thanks for listening.
BJCP.
Come and brew it.
Yeah, yeah. We're headed behind Shawn. So per BJCP, the American Stout, the overall impression is a fairly strong, highly roasted, bitter, hoppy, dark stout. Has the body and dark flavors typical of stouts, with a more aggressive American hop character and bitterness. So a lot of times people ask, what's the biggest difference between a stout and a porter? And I think right here it says a highly roasted.
Highly roasted.
Highly roasted. Roast is the biggest, the difference between a porter and a stout.
Yeah,
You know,
it's gonna
Cedric
be
asked that
roast
question.
Flavors versus
Yeah, Cedric
So-
asked that question on the group,
And I know
post
why
the other
he
day,
asked that,
and, yeah.
because
Yeah.
Cedric brewed a quote-unquote stout that he didn't put any roasted malt in. So it was really good.
Well, what do you mean by no roasted malt?
There was no roast.
There's dark malt
So
in
there's
it, right?
chocolate malt, maybe.
Chocolate malt's a roasted malt.
Yeah.
Okay.
Was it pale
Yes,
chocolate?
but,
Maybe.
but
Pale
yet
chocolate's
there,
a roasted malt.
Yeah.
So
there wasn't any of that, what you typically think as a stout roast.
Okay, so there wasn't
He didn't have any roasted barley. I want to say he probably
black
used
patents,
he
no-
probably used pale chocolate as opposed to chocolate.
Okay.
So you didn't get the bitterness from the
still
chocolate.
roasted. I mean,
It's still roasted, but it's not
But it's not that same flavor of roasted.
not something that tastes charred.
so let's take a step backwards here, because we jumped right in at American Stout, which is right, in my
that's-
opinion, right in the middle of the stout range.
Yeah.
In that you're talking about strong stout flavors, medium ABV.
Yeah.
And pretty prominent hop presence in that in terms of bitterness and that kind of thing. But let's roll it all the way back to the Irish Stout, which is where
Okay.
this all starts. So we've got Murphy's Irish Stout here, and we've got I brought some Guinness here, and
We already drink all of our Murphys.
Yeah,
both of these we should drink all of, because in my opinion both of these are fantastic beers, and both of them kind of go against the common perception of these dark beers in
Yes.
that they're big and thick and heavy and hard to drink. When you drink Guinness and when you drink Murphy's, you realize that they're not real complex beers. They're not very heavy beers. They're actually akin to a light beer.
Well, and that's what blows me most away is, I grew up drinking beer in the 2000s. And for me, a lot of the early to mid 2000s, like Shinerbach was, like we discussed earlier, Shinerbach was a dark beer.
Yeah.
So Guinness, like, that was a heavy dark beer.
That's what we thought.
That's what I thought. I drink Guinness now, and I'm like, what? There's nothing heavy, or it's a really drinkable,
when you
really
say
nice
Guinness,
beer.
there's a couple different things. Guinness Draft is one thing. Guinness Extra Stout is another. Guinness Foreign Extra Stout is another thing.
Yeah.
Very true.
So it's important to know the difference between those.
is.
Guinness Draft is what we know as the old guidelines would call it a dry stout. We now call it an Irish stout.
Guinness is the brewery. not a
Exactly.
beer.
Yes.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
And-
and with Guinness Draft, you're talking about a low alcohol beer.
Yeah.
What are these? 4.5%, 5%?
That's what I said. What's
something
it?
like
4.6,
Yeah.
4.7,
4.6,
maybe.
something like that. Yeah.
I actually
And
found out when I was in the early in my military career, what most people consider college days. I watched a program all about Guinness, and Guinness is basically a light beer. It's
It is a
only
light
like
beer,
100 calories
it's like
per
96
glass.
calories. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's.
It's
I
breakfast.
mean, people think of it
Yeah,
as
that's
being this
breakfast.
ginormous, chewy,
Exactly. Yeah.
heavy beer, and it's a light beer.
When really the
I
Irish.
thought it was bog water and chocolate syrup, wouldn't that?
Yes,
The Simpsons taught me that.
The Simpsons taught you that? Those sons of bitches. That little
What, you
pointy-headed
never saw
bastard.
that episode, dude?
I don't know. It's one of what,
There-
8,000 episodes? they have 8,000 episodes now.
I was
right?
going to say 6,000, but
Right.
yeah, it's probably somewhere in the middle.
Well,
So
that
at,
fell
at
flat.
any rate,
All right.
we need to open this and pour it, because what it is in terms of when we talk about stouts, it's a fairly one-dimensional beer. There's not a lot to it. There's a bit of a roast character to it, and that's it. You're not going to get a lot of malt character to it because it's low ABV. It's tough to get a lot of malt when it's low ABV, and
Definitely.
and it's a bit of roast, and it's easy drinking, and it's low. It's just supposed to be a very quaffable beer, and that's what
yeah.
this is, and that's where we start with the stout category.
yeah.
And so when you talk to people about this that are not stout drinkers, this is a beer that I think you could give them if you were to blindfold them, and give them this beer. If anybody likes coffee,
Anybody that
Right.
likes coffee.
They would
is
like
a
this beer.
Coffee
Yeah.
lover's beer.
Definitely.
it's a very light body, very
Yeah.
low carbonation. I mean, it's not intrusive in any way at all.
And
And that's what blows me away is there was a time that in my mind, this was a dark beer. This was a heavy beer. Like,
Yeah, right.
Oh, I can only drink like 2 or 3 Guinness and I feel full. Like there is nothing like
Right.
Yeah, but
back
back
this beer.
then you were also drinking them hot out of the can.
But yes, true. But I was also gonna say, but this beer compared to like a Coors Light isn't much different as far as fullness. Like this is an easy drinking light beer.
Yeah.
Like it's
Right. And so when it comes to brewing these at home, the beauty of this, you can have this on tap. This is something you can
Drink
pull a
the
couple of
shit
pints
out
on
of.
when you get home. You're not going to be hammered. It's not going to be way too heavy. If you have anybody who likes any type of flavor in beer at all, you're going to be able to convert them over on something like this.
100%.
If,
Definitely.
If you've got it on tap. So I think the Irish Stout is a really highly underrated style
oh definitely
because of that. And so if you want a great example of it, go get some good old Guinness Draft or some Murphy's Irish Stout, which
Yeah.
I think get overlooked by craft beer drinkers.
They really do. And
I-
And get
Right.
back in touch. This is a fantastic beer.
I've gotten a new
I'll take one of these
appreciation
any
for them
day.
recently.
Yeah.
both
Yep.
because of the BJCB class that Michael and I both took recently,
Right.
and also going out to the Renaissance festivals because you get a big old glass of it.
That's
and
right.
You
They
feel
keep it on
better
tap there,
after, well, not just on tap, but you get big old cans of it,
Yeah.
and it's cold, and you pop it open, and you drink half of the can because you're just thirsty, and you don't feel like crap afterwards.
yeah, it's super drinkable. It's
It's practically a Gatorade.
practically.
So from there you move
That's
to
the
extra
new-
stout,
that's
and
the new
that I
commercial right
think
there,
is
bro.
what everybody thinks of stout as being, which is the Guinness Extra Stout, which is a higher ABV, but
It normally comes in a bottle instead of a can.
yes, definitely in a bottle. It's not on nitro. It doesn't have the rocket widget in it or
Yeah.
whatever. And I think much more along the lines of what you see from craft breweries and a lot more common in that it's higher alcohol and you get a more pronounced bitterness from the malt. What I love about when you start getting into this range is the recipe development of it, because
Well, exactly.
we talk a lot about on this show about how most beers can be brewed with 3 or 4 malts. You don't have to get too complicated with anything. To me, when you get to this level of stout, that all goes out the window. Now
It
you
needs to be
now
complicated
it's
almost.
complicated and layered and complex. Is now we're stepping in that bog, you know. So you've got your base malt and you've got caramel malts and you've got several different roasted malts and all that kind of thing. And that's what I love when we get into these stout recipes.
Well, exactly. It's one of those like, and if you ever come into the shop and I look at your recipe and I ask you what you're brewing, it's not a knock. we see a lot of bad recipes. So
Yeah,
sometimes
that was always tough for me.
so sometimes if you bring me a recipe and you have 6 or 7 or 8 grains on it, I might ask you, hey, what are you brewing? You tell me a stout. I don't. All right, cool. And I walk straight to the back. You tell me you're brewing a blonde with 8 different grains, I'm going to be like,
Right.
well, hold on, like let's retalk this recipe here. But initially, like a lot of times, I won't even look at what the grains are. I'll just see you have a list full of grains, and I'm like, well, hold on, like what are we brewing? Oh, I'm doing this Irish stout. I'm doing an export stout. I'm doing anything stout, porter. And I'm like, you're good. Okay, never mind. Like,
He does the same thing to me. I send him my order from Panther, and he's like, "What are you brewing and why? Why are you doing it this way?"
so it was a 15-gallon pilot batch, and she only had 1 pound of lactose. And I was like, "Are you sure you only want 1 pound? Like not 3 pounds?" And
I'm like,
No, that's right.
"I get paid for this, dear." Yes.
To
Oh,
be
she's
fair,
got the card to pull on you, doesn't she?
to be fair, he might be learning.
she's like, "Road trip
So-
snacks,"
No.
and I'm like,
No, fair. I tried, Michael.
So when you get into this level, you're still not talking about a gigantic heavy beer or anything. This is the type of beer you can brew, and in 4 weeks you can have it on tap and you're ready to go. You know, it's it does need some conditioning still. I think anytime you get into these dark malts and a little bit more complex flavors, it needs a little bit of time to settle out, but not too much. I mean, I think in 4 weeks you can have a good stout on tap and be just fine.
So even we were talking even on the far extreme, the foreign extra stout. You're looking at an OG of 1056 to 1075.
Right.
So I mean, 1075 is your high end.
That's pretty.
You finish at a 1010. You're looking at what 7.5%, give or
Right. And
give or
that's a
take.
pretty big beer.
I mean,
you know.
Well, yeah. I mean, especially for what it is. That's on the high end. So yeah, a lot of these beers, you know, even the tropical stout here, which might be the next one we're going into.
Yeah, we'll talk about tropical in a minute here. That's a different animal.
Now, did anyone bring a tropical stout with them?
A lot of these are hard to
Those
get.
are hard to get. Yeah.
I know it's hard to get. That's why I'm asking.
I've had it.
I had it for one of the
So for a long
third
time,
fifth
a
time.
long time, the foreign extra stout tropical stout was included in that, and as a judge, you had to just decide: is this a tropical or is this a foreign extra? And the difference is, so the tropical stout, the origin of that is that they used to ship unfermented wort to the islands, who would then ferment it there on the islands, and they fermented it without temperature control, and it was more estery and fruity and sweet than a typical stout was, and so that's what it was. So now they've separated those out, which I think is much better than
that's
just
a wise choice, I think.
telling you that here's a stout and decide whether you think it's tropical or not. You know, you should have to declare whether it is. You're not going to find a lot of the tropical stouts, and to me,
Very hard to find.
to me, it almost seems like a flawed stout, the style itself, because it's
Estery.
very estery
Yeah.
and sweet. Yeah.
Yeah.
You know,
I'd
I
say
think
it's something that's a lot lends towards a blend of a robust porter and a stout, because it lends towards some of those more brighter, larger flavors that gets added. It's like
yeah,
other
but
than wood and
estery is
alcohol.
estery. I think is a big thing in it. That it's just a sweeter. It's not like lactose sweet. It's estery sweet.
Yeah.
Which personally, I'm not a big fan of.
It
I
has
like
its place.
seeing.
I went camping once on Galveston Island and full moon and drinking foreign extra stouts when it came out around this time about 3 years ago, 2 years ago.
Yeah,
and
yeah.
it was
Guinness had one out for a
phenomenal.
while. Yeah,
It was
Theirs was a really
just
done
unbelievable.
one.
Yeah.
I've had some others. Like I think there's some Filipino. Gosh, what is it? Lion Stout, I think, is a foreign tropical.
I think so.
Yeah, and not a big fan of that. At any rate, that's a very uncommon one. You're not going to run into
I kind of
very
want to
often.
make one and add a fruit addition or two to it.
Yeah. What I
fruit
really would like to
cocktail.
talk about is let's get into oatmeal stouts, because I think oatmeal and milk stouts have kind of come more into the forefront in the last decade or so.
Yeah.
Because now you're getting into not just a complex flavor profile, but you're talking about a different mouthfeel as well, which I think changes it.
I think they're probably more popular.
They
than
are.
a
I think
regular
they are
stout
more
now.
popular. Yeah, yeah. And that's one of the things about talking about these stouts is that it's tougher to go to the store and buy a stout now. Go look at your selection of stouts that are on the shelves and tell me what you have. You have your Guinness and that kind of thing, and then what else? I mean,
1050.
it seems like every brewery
But
used to have a
it's-
stout, and now they don't.
Yeah, you really have to. I think you're totally right. Outside of this time of year, which this is stout season. Right. This is barrel aged stout, big imperial stout season.
That's what you see a lot of now, or the big gigantic stuff.
Exactly.
But you don't have
And-
your normal everyday drinking stouts.
Yeah, and see, I think that was the New England IPA craze that kind of it's like the pendulum.
IPAs in general, I think,
Well,
drown
it's like
everything
the
out. Yeah.
pendulum really swung over there, and so the
Yeah.
like the stouts then became a little bit of an afterthought. We got to focus on these things right now. These real
So
hoppy.
for me, that's what drives me to brew things is when I can't buy them commercially.
Yeah.
That's why I don't brew any IPAs, because I can go buy any number of wonderful IPAs anytime I want. But I can't buy English beers or German beers or good stouts or anything like that. So that's what I brew.
I tell new brewers that in the shop all the time.
Yeah.
Is if you're wanting to brew a great hazy IPA, go buy it. Like, and I don't mean to be an ass, but like, especially like I've been brewing several years, and it's still hard for me to do a really good hazy.
It's a very
IPA.
difficult thing to do correctly. Yeah.
And even if you do it, a good one, you have to drink 5 freaking gallons of it as fast as you can.
Yes.
And that's hard to do.
That's a very good point. Yeah.
Yeah. So,
But I'm telling you, I judged specialty IPAs in Bluebonnet this year, which hazy IPAs fall into that. There's a lot of shitty ones.
I'm sure
that was the worst group of beers I've judged in a long time, because I think new brewers are starting to try and do that right off the bat when it's a very difficult thing to do correctly.
It sounds
It really is.
when you're first reading about them, it doesn't sound like it's an advanced
No, you're right.
process.
Yeah.
It sounds like, well, I can turn in something that was supposed to be a regular IPA or a dry hopped IPA, and if I fucked it up, then it can be a hazy IPA and no
Right.
problem.
Exactly.
But-
well, the same way people used to enter sours years ago was like, hey, this beer got infected. It must be a sour. And they'd put it in competition like that, and you get all these shitty sour beers. Yeah.
So on that note, last month I judged Master Brewer, and we had a beer that somebody entered, and come to find out later on, oh yeah, it was a beer that had sat in his garage like cellar for 3 years, and it just was a random beer that he knew was sour and knew was bad. Had I known that, I would have judged it a 13, a 15, as opposed to the more generous 20 something we gave it. I was trying to be nice and gave it like a 22, and really probably should have been at that 13 level had I known it was a shit beer.
You got to be nice.
Yeah.
No, you don't have to be nice. There's just a hard floor of how mean you can be. That's all.
Exactly. I can't give a beer 0.
So then we get into the higher ABV, the Russian Imperials and the Imperial Stouts and that kind of thing, which that's to me that's the more common that you find among commercial breweries these days.
I wish it wasn't.
That's one that we're
Yes.
passing around right now.
Yeah.
An
What is
Imperial
this?
Oatmeal
Yeah, what is
Stout.
It's Boreas, which is a 10.5 ABV Imperial Oatmeal Stout from Panther Island.
This is Panther Island? Okay.
Yes.
And
As our wonderful producer
Oh, all of
rushes
a
into
sudden
the room.
Eric rushes
super
in, yeah.
producer.
So and to me, these are the fun recipes to write, because I'll pull up the one that I'm going to pass around in a minute here that has coffee in it. So I've got pale malt, caramel malt, Munich, roasted barley, chocolate, coffee malt, flaked barley, black prince, and flaked oats.
I think you're missing one.
all right? Yeah.
There's something else that's blacker than the blackest black. It should be in there.
Right, but it's a really fun recipe to write in that you can layer your base malt, you can layer your caramel malt in the middle, your roasted malt, and then your flaked adjuncts for mouthfeel.
Yep.
And it to me that is a really fun recipe to write, to sit down and play around with those and all those moving parts. And I feel like I've got a beer that anytime I brew this, I'm super happy with it. You know, I just won
Yeah.
second place with it in Master Brewer, and it's one that when I put on tap, my wife just loves. So
Talking about since you threw out second place at Master Brewer.
Well, you know how I live at second place.
Nice little drop. No, but I was next to the table that judged your beer. I judged Master Brewer next month, and they said if you had entered it as a sweet stout, it would have scored far better.
And so you know what's funny about that is this is my milk stout recipe I just pulled the lactose out of. So
And that not that that's a bad thing. Like you
that
still
just tells me that I should have also changed the hop profile instead of just pulling the lactose out of. In terms of competition,
Yeah.
In terms of what I like to drink at home,
Oh yeah,
It's
that's
exactly what
totally
I want, but-
yeah, that's exactly. So
so then the second
ultimately, though, it had you entered it as a sweet stout, milk stout, you still would have finished second place.
yeah, you're right.
No, it really like anyway. So
That's just because the first place beer was a clear first place.
was a
above
clear
everybody.
first
Yeah,
place
100.
beer. Yeah,
I want
it
to ask
was-
an important question real quick. Where is the line between a normal stout and an imperial stout?
So
Great question.
I think anytime it exceeds the highest ABV in BJCP. I mean,
Okay, but where's that line in alcohol content?
So an American stout by BJCP is anywhere from a 1050 to a 1075, which is a 5 to 7% ABV.
Okay.
A imperial stout, which is it's 20C, if you actually are looking on the BJCP website, and an imperial stout runs 8 to 12%.
Okay. So the line is between 7 and 8%, basically between
Basically,
a normal
yeah.
stout and a
If you're at
imperial.
a 7.5, you're really fucking confused.
So,
just
here's
lost.
what I'll say about that from
7.5
a
is
judging
not too bad.
perspective. If I'm judging a beer that's called a regular stout and I have alcohol warmth coming out of it, I'm
It's
gonna
gonna get dumped.
I'm gonna ding it for that.
Yep.
And if I have an imperial stout that has no alcohol warmth to it, I'm going to question that also. Now, I won't necessarily ding it for that, but it's one of those things kind of like carbonation that it has a cascade effect to it.
Yes, it does.
That it's not.
Exactly.
It doesn't just affect the one thing that it is. It affects the flavor. It affects the mouthfeel. It affects the finish. All kinds of things. So that's what you have to think of in terms of alcohol strength when you're figuring out where to place it. And again, this goes to what we've talked about for a long time, and not necessarily entering what you intended to brew,
But what you
but
actually
entering
what the
what
beer is.
Yeah, what it
Right.
tastes like when it's done. So if you intended to brew an imperial stout, but you brew it and it has no alcohol warmth to it at all or anything like that, you might put it in a regular American stout or something like that. Or, vice versa. If you brewed an American stout but it has a definite alcohol warmth to it, you better kick it up because it will get dinged for that.
Yeah.
And
I think
that's
that's one of
strictly
those-
in terms of brewing for competition. You know?
Well, and kind of on that same thing, like, yes, there's guidelines for ABV, but if yours is maybe on that higher end of American stout, gravity and ABV, but it has that definite warmth, then yeah, maybe like enter it as a imperial, because like you were saying,
Absolutely,
that
yeah.
warmth, you might not quite be there. You might be at a 6.8%, as opposed to the 7, which
Right. Or the other
Or
option
the other
would be
way
to
around.
let it sit for a little bit longer and see if the alcohol tones down a little bit.
Right.
You probably the correct answer to that is enter it early and enter it late and see
Enter
which
it
one
both.
does better. Sometimes that's how those beers go. You don't know when they're going to be at their peak, so you just enter them several different times. But when it comes to the difference between imperial and regular, no one is going to be able to
Exactly.
sit there with a beer and look at it and taste it and say, I think this is 7 and not 8, and I'm not going to. It has to do with the perception, the warmth, and that kind of thing.
exactly. But I can easily drink it and think, this is a 5 to 6, not the imperial 9% they say.
Everybody's staring at us through the window here, so I've begun to become abrasive towards them.
Might be something to get used to when we move studios. Make
Yeah,
this more of a
you're
live
probably
feel.
right. So I probably need to calm
Yeah.
down a little bit, right?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Well,
not get
fingers
so
are
worked
welcome.
up. Yeah.
Yeah, man. Hey, direct your anger at the appropriate places,
Oh,
like
like
Apple and
that?
Microsoft. Come on.
Can you pass this one along for me?
Yeah, I'm trying. Yeah, aim more towards the camera though, so we can see that. There you go. Much better.
Okay, I don't know where my camera is. Oh, it's there. Okay, all right, I get it.
So where are we at on our stout journey? We are
Well,
now at.
So now let's talk about adding things to stout.
Well,
Now let's talk about how wonderful stout is as a canvas to put other things on. Because to me, that's the beauty of this. Is it's such a great, complex, and robust flavor profile that you can put things on top of it, and
oh, definitely.
it won't drown out the beer below it. So I've got a coffee stout here. We can start with that if we want. And I've got a commercial coffee stout here from New Mexico also.
I have one too.
ooh, Battle of the Coffee Stouts.
That's incredibly
Dun-
loud.
Hell,
isn't
yeah,
it?
what is good? I
Is
thought
that the
somebody
worst?
fired. Yeah.
Is that the worst sound
Ricola.
that we've ever had on this show? Oh my God! Should I stop doing this? Or
Yes,
is it,
yes, please. I'm going to
have
take
now
my beer
lost-
and go home.
It's
We have
like
now
you're playing
lost all
the
listeners.
didgeridoo or something.
for those of you not watching the video,
It's a didgeridoo. That's exactly what it sounds like.
it's a didgeridoo, is what it is.
I mean, I came into the room and heard the sound, and I want to throw my boot at Brandon right now.
I think
Which-
we all need to just assault him from every
Steel
angle.
toe and
So
all.
all I'm doing is sliding my growler over the table here. I'm amazed at what an awful sound that was.
we can edit that out in post, right?
We're
See, I thought
absolutely
no,
not
that
adding
won't
that
happen.
out.
I was in here like really peeing myself because I thought Jesus was coming right then.
I
that
thought-
was the trumpet. I was scared.
I thought T-Pain was farting through his microphone.
Oh, that was actually my second.
That's really good. I like
It was
that one.
either Jesus or T-Pain.
Jesus or T-Pain farting. One of the two.
oh Lord.
Oh man, if I had a nickel for every time I had to decide whether it was Jesus or T-Pain.
Father Jeff, please
no,
don't
so-
quit.
Which T and Pain kind of make
Guarantee
up
he
the cross.
doesn't listen to
so,
this mess.
I'm just saying.
So this is just my oatmeal stout with some coffee in it. I'll just slide that over to Sandra.
That's the gastrin in the coffee.
Coffee works quick.
So that's what happens when you break out the imperial stouts.
Yeah.
Start with
Don't
the
Oh,
Imperial
we're
Stouts.
not even
Don't worry.
close to the end
Okay,
of this
so-
journey.
There's more.
So as Sandra passes around the coffee stout, how did you use the coffee? Did you use real coffee? Did you use coffee malt? How
Okay,
did
so when I kegged this beer, I poured 2 things of cold brew coffee into it
two
because
things.
I have
Yeah, how do
one.
you-
it's like
how do you
twice as
cold brew
many
your
as one
coffee?
things. No, it was I bought some Starbucks cold brew coffee.
You should have told me I have a cold brew thing at home.
Sandra will want to
Define
talk
the
to
cold brew thing.
It's a large mason jar with a hop filter
I'm
in
turning
it.
50 this year. I'll tell you later. After
No, it was just 2 jars of Starbucks cold brew.
you. Okay,
That can work. Yeah.
no, I've just
I don't
gotten-
have a French press or anything.
I've
like
just
that,
gotten
so.
into cold brew. Or, mainly Sandra's gotten into cold brew.
I've gotten. I'm trying to give up energy drinks, so
That's never going to work.
You should definitely do that.
I think
Yeah.
you did it right by doing cold brew though, because cold brew is going to be a lot less harsh
right.
edge over
Right.
overall. So
Right, you
that's a way
already
to do
have
it.
some harshness from the roast malt and that kind of thing in there. You want the coffee to just be flavor and not any of that harsh bitterness that you get with normal coffee.
right.
So that's what I did.
And also, when I've used coffee in a stout before, I put it in the secondary as ground coffee because I felt like I was making a cold brew.
That's
Yeah,
another
I've made
great
that
way to
mistake
do
as
it.
well.
So,
Yeah. Yep.
and I've done it with the whole beans instead of grinding them, and I used like a pound and 5 gallons. Don't do that.
Oh my
But
God.
that is I
Yeah,
N-
you,
now,
It was
you
a
definitely
different-
don't want to grind it real
To-
fine or anything. You want it just
to clarify-
super kind of broken up.
for
not-
the coffee
Coarse grind.
stout
Yeah, very coarse.
kit at the store, we give you like 4 or 5 beans
Yeah.
and tell you to crack them gently and then put them into secondary.
Well, in my defense,
Not
Just
a
the
full
whales.
The whales have returned.
Just like Star Trek.
this was very early in our brewing,
Okay,
and
I mean,
got the recipe from
has
the
nice head
internet.
brand.
and-
not to make you feel
yeah.
attacked, because my second batch of beer I ever did was a vanilla coffee stout, and I didn't have any coffee beans, so I just took a K-cup of coffee and cut it open and dumped
Oh
it in
my god,
secondary.
dude!
K-cup.
It was the most coffee flavored thing I've ever had in my entire life, including coffee.
But one thing I want to say about coffee is, and I've learned this from some class I took online, but their coffee can have just as many different flavors as a hop would.
Oh,
So
absolutely.
you
Yeah.
know, you can get fruit from it, you can get spice from it. So
Yeah.
find a coffee that you enjoy drinking and use it. Don't.
That's a very good point, because we had the guys from Avoca
Vodka.
on here.
Yeah.
Avoca.
Vodka, something like that. I don't
They
know.
pronounce it Avoca, so I'm assuming it's Avoca.
Are you saying
it wrong on
Mike is
purpose.
wrong about something?
No, I
No,
I
no.
might be.
Can
I
we
might be.
repeat that?
Okay, so
Yeah,
no,
vodka is a cow, so
That,
that'd be a milk
that
cow.
actually led to my question as far as what coffee and how do you choose which particular beans to use? You know, which.
Well,
coffee?
I think Sandra hit the nail on the head on that, because he did talk about how there are so many different flavors out of coffee that we don't normally associate with it, depending on how you extract the flavor from the coffee of it. You know, he was saying espresso compared to cold brew is totally different, and you can get like blueberry and all kinds of different flavors out of coffee. So exactly what you're saying, find the coffee that you like the taste of and put it in there.
Exactly.
For me, I was like, Starbucks. I
coffee.
just poured in here.
Yeah, I went Sumatra all the way with mine. I love Sumatra.
I think if I ever did another coffee stout, that's exactly how I would go.
yeah, it was
Sumatran,
great. Sumatran.
cold brewed Sumatran, or a really strong hot.
And if you want it fruity,
Course
go with Ethiopian.
Yeah.
So, there you go.
Okay, so kind of
We've
on
covered coffee.
On that same note, kind of on that coffee note though, has anybody used any of those like flavored coffees that maybe have some cinnamon and vanilla flavors? Does that come through in your finished product?
I've used those for making cold brew, because I subscribe to a company called Bones Coffee, and they make a lot of flavored coffees. They're very, very strong flavors, and the labeling makes you think.
But have you put them in beer?
Not yet. I've been trying to find one that would be complementary to it, because they already taste like such strong
They have
things.
a bourbon one.
They have a bourbon
which
that's
tastes
super expensive.
like bourbon. They have a
super
bourbon
good.
bacon
Why
one,
don't you-
which tastes like bourbon
Why
and
don't you
bacon
just
already.
drink bourbon in the morning? I don't understand this.
Because some of us have corporate jobs that they test for those things.
That's the best time to drink them.
I know, I'm not salary yet. It's okay.
I mean, on the corporate job.
So
But I mean, they have such strong flavors already that taste like certain things that you don't necessarily want to add those strong flavors to a beer that you want to have other things shine through in. You'd much rather find something that has some particular flavors in it that you want to shine through with a finished project.
I'm gonna say, for my golden, I got a was it Mexican hot chocolate flavored coffee, and it said cinnamon and things like that, and I didn't get the cinnamon to come through. Y'all can tell me, but I didn't. I was hoping it would come through, but it didn't.
Let's drink that, because that's an interesting idea. So
That's
the other
something
part
that
of this,
I did as a beer separate too.
the other part of this are beers that are designed to taste like stouts, but not necessarily look like them, where you get the coffee and the licorice and the roast and that kind of thing from other ingredients that don't necessarily add color.
So that's one of my biggest pet peeves and one of my kind of favorite things, all in the same. People come in, they're like, I don't like dark beer. Well, that's a pet peeve, because dark is a color. That tells me nothing.
Right.
So that's why I love a beer like this, which, it's a golden, it's a clearer, like, it's a light colored beer, but it's going to give you every flavor of a dark beer. Every flavor of a stout, that chocolate, that coffee, those roast flavors, you get all of that.
It is so surprising how much flavor you get when you look at that beer.
Yeah, I mean it's
And I think brewing in golden, something it kind of pushes your brewing knowledge because you have to break down what are all the complexities of a stout, and then try to reproduce them in a non-traditional
Not
way.
only just reproduce them, but reproduce them in the appropriate proportions to each other.
and this is kind of the interesting thing.
really chocolatey, but
It's on the way. It's getting there.
Mm-hmm.
You know what this reminds me of is the what's the Panther Island, the chocolate milk,
Sweet Fang.
the Sweet
Sweet
Fang.
Fang.
Yeah.
This tastes like Sweet Fang,
I almost picked up, but then I was like, no, we're doing regular stout.
which
We
we've
don't
had
know
them
that.
on here to talk about before, which is
know
their
it-
milk stout that
And
tastes
we
like Cocoa
sold
Puffs,
out
basically.
of the peanut butter extract in like 4 hours
that
the next day.
Yeah.
Yeah,
That's true.
And
I
we
think
took us.
I
what
bought some of it. So
where I went wrong is I only used about 2 ounces of cold brew in the. I think it needed a little bit more of that roast character. But
Yes, it does. It needs
But
a
I
little more
didn't-
roast. Yeah.
the particular coffee that I chose just it wasn't very strong in flavor. So
What
I
coffee
did-
did you choose?
it
remember?
was something from Central Market that was Mexican hot chocolate. So I was hoping it would have that. It had the chocolate definitely
Yeah,
came through, but the cinnamon and the spice didn't, and really the roast from the
It really
coffee
tastes
didn't
actual
come
closer
through.
to a
Yeah.
horchata.
Yeah,
I think if you're going to go roast with coffee, you do need like that espresso type, French
yeah.
type coffee.
And it was
because that is
my
super
first
burnt.
time making cold brew at home, and so I didn't let it sit
Right.
long enough. Now I know better.
It's
but-
still a fantastic beer.
Honestly,
it's still
Yeah, it's really good.
for making cold brew, I've had excellent extraction of flavors in 12 hours.
Yeah.
There's a lot that goes into getting the different flavors. Whether you're starting with a cold water, a lukewarm water, or hot water, and then whether or not you're letting it sit at room temperature, at a hot temperature, or at a cold temperature. I
Yeah.
normally just add lukewarm water to my grounds and then stick it directly in the fridge and let it sit for 12 hours.
Yeah. I make it almost every morning now, and now I would do this completely different.
But for those of y'all that are at home that kind of like the idea of toying with a golden stout, Sandra, by any chance, do you remember what exactly you used here, recipe wise?
I have no clue. I'm sorry.
Okay, so
I'm not prepared.
But the
okay,
biggest
next
key
time.
is you're looking to get those stout flavors. We added cacao nibs to this beer, correct?
Yeah, there's vanilla, there's cacao nibs.
And there's also the coffee that we
I
discussed.
used flaked oats, and I believe I used flaked barley,
How did you add your vanilla?
just a bean.
Okay.
I soaked a bean in vodka and
Okay.
split it.
vanilla
threw it in.
tincture. Okay.
Yeah.
So for the biggest takeaway though is for the flavors that we couldn't get with the grain, the roast, the chocolate, the even the vanilla helps amplify some of those flavors like we've discussed in previous episodes. That was the biggest thing with this is what we had a solid base. What I think we used Planet Malt, which
Yeah.
gives it a little more maltiness, and then we basically took just a solid base and we amplified what we needed, we to make it a stout.
Right.
Like you said, like that's ultimately what we're discussing is what makes a stout kind of in a way.
Right.
And it's some of that. It's that roast. It's that chocolatey flavor. So we took basically a basic beer and added those flavors, and that's something to keep in mind when doing the style is what's going to add those flavor. What can I use post fermentation? Like kind of we've talked a lot of this episode is post fermentation additions. And this was all post fermentation that
Right.
we got these flavors. So
Right. So
And
there's
I have another pastry stout. This is Celebrate from Panther Island. This is our golden pastry stout that we brewed with 270 pounds of vanilla sheet cake.
oh
So
Wow.
it tastes like a vanilla cupcake, I think.
we could have
So-
used you on an episode like a few months ago on that one.
Yeah, when we had the 903 stuff.
Yeah, man.
Yeah.
Wow.
and this beer, like the day that it premiered, I was at the brewery and hanging out with all the owner people, like all the cool people. But it was one of
Trying
those
to
beers
fit
that,
in, we
that
understand.
I
Well,
was.
it
I
was
was trying to be cool.
It was a collab with Grady Spencer in the work.
Okay.
who's a local Texas country artist. But this was one of those beers that the more I drank of it, the more I enjoyed the hell out of it. As this beer warms up, it gets even better. And just it was a beer that I just really was super impressed by.
Oh,
What is this again?
I can
It
smell
is
the
a
cake.
golden pastry stout with vanilla cake.
It's basically like a sheet cake stout.
I can smelling this before I taste it because I haven't tasted it yet. I smell it and I go, that smells like fresh cake,
Yeah.
which is one of those things that it's hard to get
But I do gotta
a
say when
smell
you use
right on
certain
purpose.
ingredients that you got to think about, well, what's in that ingredient. I brewed a batch of beer today and I used Lucky Charms in it. Well, you got to think, well, what is Lucky Charms made out of? Those,
A lot of things.
yeah, the marshmallows that's going to ferment out. So now how do I go back and recreate that? So just throwing something in the mash, it's not necessarily going to translate. So don't be surprised when you taste it and, oh man, I taste it strong, comes through. Taste it again later, it's gone. It fermented out.
I think that's one of the reasons that some of the companies who have made pastry stouts make them and they're intended to be drink really, really fresh, and they don't last in cans
because
those flavors are very volatile, and that even if they manage to survive fermentation, they don't last long post fermentation. They're very delicate, or not necessarily delicate, but very volatile flavors.
Right. And it's one of those, I think it also leads you, and one thing I've learned when I transition to the professional side of it, you need to taste the beer from start to finish.
Yes.
Constantly be pulling a sample and tasting it. I'll know that it's finished, but I'm going to let it sit a little while it cold crashes. I'm still pulling samples and tasting it every single day, because then okay, something has changed. I might need to add something back in before I keg it or bottle it. Or
Well, so I think the biggest thing that we're learning, though, especially doing as we transition our discussion into these pastry stouts, is know what flavors you're working with. If you're wanting XYZ flavors, use some grain that plays off those, but also use some additives later on that are going to boost those flavors. On the Golden Stout, we couldn't, you couldn't add roasted and chocolate malts, and so we plays off those flavors later. In your cinnamon or in the Lucky Charms beer you talk about, you're going to do different things later on to boost those flavors. And
yeah, I'm already prepared. I'm going to have to go in and add marshmallow extract because those are going to ferment out in a second. So I've got that planned ahead, but I'm going to taste it and see how it goes.
I'm very curious to talk
So what
to
do we
you
got
later
going around
about-
right now?
I have no clue.
So this is my stout.
It's the mystery
It
Great
is
Crowler.
stout.
I would enter this as a American stout, I believe.
Okay.
I went off of Bell's Kalamazoo Stout rough idea recipe. They don't give you the exact recipe, but on their website they give you each of their
Percentages?
stouts, and they give you ideas on how to formulate their
Okay.
stouts.
So for those that don't know, though, also a great thing about Bell's is they have a homebrew shop.
Yeah, they started out as
They
homebrewers.
started out as homebrewers.
I didn't know that.
They started out with a homebrew shop, and then, if I'm not mistaken, it started with a super tiny production brewery, and then have now grown into this huge juggernaut almost.
Right.
This is
Yeah, I need
really
a better pour of that.
Yeah.
this
is a beer.
wonderfully sweet little stout.
Yeah. A little sweet
A little sweet, but it's a delicate sweetness. It's almost like
because there's
like
a good
getting powdered sugar or confectioner sugar sweetness.
having all the beers I've had tonight. Yeah, this does come back and taste a little sweeter. But when I'm drinking it at home, I just get so much roast and it seems so dry.
Well, the roast and the dryness is one thing, but then the bitterness from the hops balancing out is a different thing. I think a lot of these beers come across as being drier than they actually are. because of the roast that's in them.
Right.
This, I think, for an American, I think this needs a little more hops in it.
Gotcha. Yeah.
Yeah. Right now, if you were to call this an Irish stout, I think it'd be
that's
right on.
Exactly what I was just
Yeah.
saying. It was Irish stout. It tastes like an Irish stout without the nitro.
And in a way,
Right.
it's well, Irish stout
Without
doesn't
the
require
body,
nitro
but-
at all.
Yeah, I know, but I'm thinking like most nitro stouts have that perceived sweetness because of the creaminess. This has that sweetness without any of that extra mouthfeel.
So to get that sweetness, there is about either a pound or half a pound, somewhere in that range of caramel malt to kind of bring out. And they mentioned that in the recipe formulation. They're like, you want some sweetness. It is supposed to have a little bit more of that licorice flavor, but
And
the
it's a
licorice
little
flavor
bit
doesn't.
more of that than an Irish stout would
Right.
call for. So I think if you just
Right.
up the IBUs on a little bit, it would be right in that American stout range.
Yeah.
Because I think it's a little out of style for the Irish also, but it's
Right.
closer to the Irish than it is American.
Right.
So definitely, like you just talked about the caramel. Like I had a recipe come in the shop recently that had 0% caramel malt, and I'm like, so what are you brewing? And he was brewing like a stout, and I'm like,
Yeah, and I've really come
like,
around on that.
We need you need a little
You
bit
need
of that
some of it in
caramel.
there.
Like,
Yeah,
you
yeah.
need
Yeah.
some, like, and that's
The supporting role.
I've
Yeah,
gone to
right.
where I really try to stay away from caramel malt as much as possible, but then I realize you've got to have some in there.
Right.
yeah, exactly. There's some
Particularly with
beers
stouts
that-
and porters, because the roast malts can be so harsh. If you don't have something balance them out, you've got to have some caramel malt in there.
Definitely.
And to me, it's in the 40 to 60 range where you want the caramel to be. I don't like to get too much higher than that because then you get that raisiny flavor that I don't particularly like. But
Raisins. So guys, how many more stouts do we have? Are we?
I think
we're
that
about
covers
down
it.
to
I don't know.
I have an oyster stout.
So
Oh, shit. Well,
so
that's-
One
on
last.
the far end of the extremes, Sandra pulls an oyster stout
So this is a beer I hate the idea of.
because I hate the idea of raw oysters. So
Well, I love
That's-
oysters.
that's what I
love
think
oysters,
of.
but I
Let's-
don't think everything should be combined with other things.
Did you not grow up on the coast?
So-
Did you not grow up reading
But-
Cosmo like the
No.
rest of us teenage boys?
I grew up in
Trying to learn
in Fort Worth,
weird
Texas,
secrets?
where oysters were not common.
So this is Edgewise 8 mating call.
grew up on Texas
it's a
oysters.
5.8% oyster stout.
I'm surprised you survived, sir.
Okay.
What have we here?
I'm trying to pull up
Oyster stout first.
And we also have Tyler's.
Maybe not. What's
Wait, is
Tyler's?
Tyler's?
We have
an oyster
Tyler's
stout?
stout as well.
Oh,
No,
yeah.
his is Sans Oyster.
Oh.
Yeah, no. Let's do Tyler's first.
Yeah, I think Tyler's and then Oyster
Yeah,
is
yeah.
probably the best.
I think oyster should be the end of the line for everything.
and then
Tyler, come on.
And
So
then
what-
we'll
what-
wrap
then once we taste these two, then wrapping it all up in your expert opinions, what I'd like to hear what you think makes stout again out of all those styles that you tried. So
You're asking a lot.
I'm
there.
asking, yeah.
All right, so what do we have here? That Brandon's
Oatmeal stout.
Bogarting.
All right, so it's an oatmeal stout. It's 5.3%, 5.3%, 35 IBU.
And it's drinkable, and you drink it.
So it's a 5.3% oatmeal stout.
So what we talk about when we talk about oatmeal stout is what we're saying is we're going to take a medium range ABV stout and make it a little chewier. That's all we want. When we're putting flaked adjuncts into these things, whether it's flaked oats or flaked barley or whatever, you're just trying to add a little bit of chewiness to it. You're trying some mouthfeel.
Like
and-
if you're a little ashy, you want to just
And-
flick off some skin in there.
just make it more substantial without making it really high ABV.
yes.
Is the thing. You know, if you make something 8 or 9%, it's going to be a substantial beer that's going to have a lot of mouthfeel to it. But we would like something that's 5.5%.
And Brandon, when you make a bowl of oatmeal and it has that chewy, that kind of real.
I don't make oatmeal.
I don't make oatmeal either.
Well, you've had
make a lot
oatmeal.
of oatmeal.
Come on.
I've literally never even heard of oatmeal.
Is that what
is it?
translates over into the body? Is that that kind of real creamy.
So what you're talking about with flaked adjuncts like oats and barley and that kind of thing is the grain itself is pressed between heated rollers, so it becomes partially fermentable but partially not fermentable. So you end up adding some dextrins to your final product. You end up with more unfermentable sugars that go into there, but flavor also.
And it gives it
comes
more of
from
that
it.
mouthfeel.
So it makes it a fuller mouthfeel, a little bit more chewy, and a little bit more substantial without adding a lot of alcohol to it, is what you're doing with the
I did
flaked
not
adjuncts.
realize that. I thought that the flaked adjuncts were just powdered versions of the bases.
No,
that were
it's
easily fermentable.
Yeah, they're partially fermentable.
Okay.
Similar to how caramel malts are, where caramel malts, when you get into that mid range, they're partially fermentable, partially not. Same type of thing, where they're going to add some mouthfeel to it, and you'll see that in recipe development with 40, 60, 80 caramel malt ranges, where they say that adds head retention and mouthfeel and that kind of thing to it. Similar with flaked adjuncts.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, because I get a lot of mouthfeel in this
Yes.
oatmeal stout.
No, so definitely. So ultimately, wait, we still have the.
We have
Oh,
oysters.
that's nice.
We
man.
still have
That's
the
a nice
oyster
beer.
stout.
It's
Looking
that's a
forward to
really
that.
good solid stout, though. By the way,
Yeah,
Tyler.
it really
Very
is,
nice,
Tyler. Well done, sir.
Great mouthfeel
Well
on it.
done, sir.
I think we could easily wrap up before we try the oyster stout.
No, we need it.
No, we gotta do
the oyster
We
stout
have
be
to.
last, but I think we could generally say so. The biggest key with stouts is there's some rose character.
Right.
Yeah.
You get some chocolate.
Yeah.
Color we can say is almost
It's
negotiable.
got to be pretty dark, I think.
It's got to be pretty
It's
dark.
gotta be really
even
dark.
your Irish stouts, your light
No,
ones
but-
Yeah.
are almost opaque.
But your golden stout, this gives you all the same flavor.
I'm not
Well,
going
I
to
don't-
put that in the category.
Yeah.
I wouldn't either. Those are bonus beers.
But
I brewed one. I
But
wouldn't
that-
put it in the
that-
category.
It's
That's
not
the
a
fun
thing
thing.
yet. It's not a thing
That-
yet. It's
that-
a thing people are doing, but it's not a real
it's
thing
not a
yet.
not a real
so.
thing yet.
I will say it frustrates the heck out of me when I'm beer tending and people are like, "Man, that's really good, but it's a stout and I don't drink stouts." I'm like, it could be labeled anything.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Blindfold them.
That's when when
Stop
you
it.
pour them a Guinness and say, "Well, here, try this." Then
Yeah. This
Exactly.
is
Tell me
tell them
something
there's
about it.
something.
Like,
It's
there's-
something other than it is, and see if they like it. They
It's
go
a stout
"Gotcha."
on the board, so they're. I don't like stouts.
No, that's fine though. That's fine.
So-
I
so
recently
you know what?
converted a friend at home doing that too. And he's like, I don't like dark beers, and I poured him in dark mild and London brown, and he's like, those are both amazing, but they're dark. I don't understand what just happened.
Yeah.
So if anybody just happens to be listening on still to us,
Probably.
my
not.
challenge to you guys is go out and try a Guinness. Try just a plain old Guinness.
I challenge you to fly to
then-
Ireland and try a Guinness, and then
No.
Fly me to Ireland.
Yeah,
I'll
fly us to
try.
Ireland, but
that's
but-
more of a challenge, is all.
but try a Guinness.
All right, man.
Look
Let's
me
do
up on
this.
Facebook. Hit me up on
Fucking
Facebook.
let's
Like
wrap this.
I want to know you're drinking Guinness because it's OG.
I will tell you, I was scared of the oyster stout, and then when I tried it, I was like, "Oh, this is not."
So
bad.
an
Listen,
oyster
I
stout
like
is-
oysters. I like stouts. I don't think all things should hold hands.
And I saw pictures of them.
And literally, an oyster stout is
Processing
you
them.
add oysters
just add-
to a stout.
Yeah.
So a little bit on
Is
the
it the
oyster
water?
stout. It,
Oh.
Yes,
It might
it
be-
does. It does deal with water.
It might
because
be a
there's-
little bit, goes a long way.
There's a lot of chloride in the oyster shell, from what I remember, and so chlorides are better for stouts and adding additions to your water. So that kind of started off like that, and also looking at water profiles for stouts when I brewed mine, a lot call for salt to be added to your water, and oysters are naturally have a little bit of salt, so it's kind of a natural component to add to a stout.
They're also natural aphrodisiacs. So
Which is not where we're going to on this.
combining that with the
mostly
alcohol,
male.
you might be, giving it to your date. It might be
And-
a win-win.
And mind you,
all our
I don't know. I feel like after drinking it,
Stout after party special orgy, just for
Whoa,
you guys,
whoa,
only
whoa.
for Patreon.
I feel like after
Whoa.
drinking this, that anybody
Is that-
that gave it to me, I would be willing to tell them "fuck you." So it's kind of an aphrodisiac in that respect.
It's
I don't
definitely
like that. It's exactly what I thought it was going to be. I'm not a big fan.
And see, I got the brininess, but I thought it brought out the roasted character and the chocolate a little bit more than I expected. I thought it was going to be. I expected it to be fishy because when I poured it, you could smell that brine, but I did see the value of that. It brought out the character of a stout a little bit
this
more.
particular one. I'm gonna say
I kind of like it.
the brininess brought out some of the flavors.
Yeah, I agree.
And accentuated them because that's what salt does. It
Right.
drives down some of the bitterness characteristics so
exactly.
you can taste other things. Same way of adding a pinch of salt to a normal brew coffee. This doesn't make me want to drink another one of these. But
Yes.
it also doesn't make me
I love it.
not want to try another oyster
like it.
stout at the same time.
I'm not a fan.
Yeah, I think if someone handed you this without saying it's an oyster stout,
Right.
You'd
You would
want to
not
punch them
know.
in the face a little
you
bit.
would not know.
Yeah.
But
what is
That's kind of what I thought. If you didn't know there were oysters in it, you might be like, well, that's a very different stout.
Yeah. It's like, oh, that's really good. Poured in a planter.
So I think ultimately where we stand, whether it's a sweet stout, it's a American stout, it's an oyster stout. Like stouts don't have to be this big, heavy 10% thing.
You're right.
It can be something more drinkable. It can be something closer to the Irish stout. It can be something that we all enjoy that just might be dark in color.
Yeah.
But has some wonderful flavors.
I think it's also it's a great base. It could be anything,
Wh-
you want it to be.
Which,
it can be.
which a stout is a great base to add a lot of different things for. Which I think that ultimately leads to our making beer again. And you know, we're looking at doing some of these just basic beers that a lot of people aren't doing. A basic stout, yeah, we covered a shitload of different stouts tonight, but the basic American stout we aren't doing a lot. And that's why we're looking at for March, we're going to do a blonde ale. Like just a basic OG blonde beer.
Yeah, we're gonna do.
But we're gonna
quick spring beers. is what we're gonna do.
Some quick spring beers, one of which being a blonde. Like I think we haven't totally nailed down that, but I think we're gonna do some quick spring beers. It being a blonde ale for March. Some different things that are just really drinkable, really like easy turning. Some things like that. We have some. We have a.
We do saisons, that kind of thing. The
Saisons,
sort of things we
yeah.
want to drink when the weather starts to warm up. And the beauty of these beers is that you can turn them on quickly.
Quick.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so look for that in the next episode. And
Yeah, we have lots of fun things. Be sure to check out our Patreon
And our brew focus pages.
and our Brew Focus pages, which
such
are
as Brew with Chris.
Yeah,
Brew with
Brew with Chris
Brando.
and Brew with Brando. Nobody else is here. There's
Brew with
yet to be a
Nigel.
Brew with and a Brew with
Stubby's hanging
Nigel.
out back here somewhere.
A Brew with
Stubby.
Nigel, a Brew with Stubby.
If
Brew
you
with
can
Mikey
find
B?
Stubby
Brew
Brew
with Mikey
something,
B.
yeah, Mikey was
really-
supposed to be here tonight, and he wasn't. He and I are doing several different lager experiments.
There's Mikey
with-
B right
which-
there he's on the camera right now.
No,
No,
he's
that's
not.
John.
Not him.
So,
Well,
Damn it.
anyways, guys, like we appreciate that y'all stuck through all the bullshit that has been the last few months, and that y'all are still listening. We have a lot of
All right,
great things
so
coming.
come back
We-
next
we
month. We
have
got a
lot
couple
yeah,
of Final
exactly.
Gravity episodes going to happen.
Nice.
And come and brew it.
Come and
Come
brew
and
it.
brew it.
Remember it?
Yeah.